Welcome to another episode of the Reedman Report, where we talk about risk, technology, education, and security. Making her third appearance on the show is my good friend and colleague, Alexandra Herberhold, who is a licensed mental health practitioner and de-radicalization coach. Alexandra, we've got a third person here today. What are we going to talk about?
Today we are going to talk about gore content, the impact that it has, the roads that it can lead people down, and how acknowledging it is a really, really good opportunity for early intervention. And we have Dana coming on today, who is a parent, and she also is a huge advocate for online safety after her own experience. And she is doing some projects coming up recently where she's going to be making things for mental health practitioners, how to screen for that based on her own experience with her child. So we're going to be covering a lot of different stuff, but it's all related to gore, and hopefully we will have a solution at the end of how we can leverage this into a positive thing to help more people.
Yeah, so my name is Dana Cruiser, and I live in Denver, Colorado. Back in February 2024, my son's secret online life unraveled pretty quickly. Thank goodness. I was able to save him from 764 and nihilistic violent extremism, not a moment too late. I now write about that on my Substack, Slow Tech Revolution. I talk about, the warning signs that I saw, what brought him to that content, which is not often what people think brings kids like this to this content. And I also do a lot of advocacy, both at the state level, at the local level, at the school level, and at the federal level to protect kids online.
And I think, Alexandra, we've spent now more than 2 hours of airtime talking about the online path to radicalization and how kids get into that gore content. What got you and Dana connected?
I write a lot about the TCC online, and Dana reached out to me on LinkedIn because of her own experience with her son and appreciated the things that I was writing. And we ended up doing a Zoom call and talked for almost 3 hours and have been fast friends ever since.
Yeah, so I think a lot of parents don't know how easy it is to find this content online. I was one of those parents. I had parental control set up. I had screen time limits, no phones in the bedroom, no phones at the dinner table. And back 3 or 4 years ago, when my son first got his first smartphone, I was actually an outlier to have any sort of protections like that on his phone. Um, and I didn't know that children could access not only rated R kind of violent content that would just show up in their feeds, even if they weren't searching for it, but some of the most disgusting, violent, just horrific videos that nobody should be watching, especially kids and teenagers. So my son's first exposure to violent content was actually on Roblox at age 9. That was the first and last time he ever played Roblox. Again, a game that's marketed as a safe game for kids. We all know better than that now. Um, but he just had, kind of more typically, again, rated R violent content that would show up in his YouTube feed. I did not allow him to have social media. Again, YouTube was not kind of categorized as social media at that time. It was more, it's educational, it's fun videos, it's, used at their school. It's perfectly safe, right? Um, but he quickly spiraled into gore content. Just the algorithms started really popping it up as he was, as a curious teenage boy might. If you rest your eyes for 10 or 20 seconds on a violent video, the algorithm's going to continue to feed you more extreme content, no matter what the subject matter. And this, within just a matter of weeks and a few months, he became completely entrapped. He turned into a completely different child, somebody that I didn't recognize. And he was completely hooked on it, watching it at the end 12 to 14 hours a day. And I didn't understand, again, that this was pretty readily accessible online. I was actually checking his phone at certain points during this few months where he was spiraling, because I just from things that he was saying, I felt like he was seeing something online that wasn't something I would agree with. But unfortunately, kids are way smarter than their middle-aged parents on how to bypass parental controls. And a lot of this stuff just wouldn't even be filtered out anyway, just because it has innocuous titles, or however they can get around these monitoring systems. So he had a whole lot of ways to cover his tracks until the very end, when the FBI ended up actually going through his phone. Um, but yeah, I think parents just need to be aware that the feeds that we see as adults and the feeds that kids see on these social media platforms are very different things.
And let's pause on that, because you hit one point quickly. When the FBI searched his phone, how exactly did that happen, and how did you find out at that point?
Yeah, so I'm jumping ahead a bit in the story, but I insisted that he be hospitalized because he had been having increasing amounts of self harm, increasing amounts of depression. Again, I've been raising alarm bells for many months, and he just continued to spiral out of control. My daughter found a hunting knife that he had purchased online. I had all sharps and anything he could hurt himself with, either locked up or just completely out of the house, months before that. But he had bought a hunting knife that was inscribed with the word death. It had a gut hook. I mean, we're talking, the blade's that big. My daughter found it. She brought it to my attention after school one day. I had the police meet me at pickup. They were like, nothing to see here. Everything's great. So I took him to the hospital. Long story short, they were trying to send him home. In his medical file, it was noted that he had what we now know are cut signs, and they probably should have known that. They did not. He had an extensive amount of self harm. He was saying, I'm having repetitive thoughts of suicide. I don't want to kill myself, but I can't stop thinking about it. And I'm scared of what I might do. And I'm scared that the last few self harm incidents that I had went too far. I was very scared that I might have, accidentally cut myself too deep. They still wanted to send him home because he didn't have a specific plan. I insisted that he stay and that I was not going to bring him home under any circumstances. Uh, the next morning, a detective with the school violence department at Denver County called me, asked me a bunch of questions about his online activity, and wrapped it up by saying, I believe your son's been entrapped in 764. And I'm like, what the hell is that? I had no idea what that was. So there had been a case in Denver in the fall where a middle school student had stabbed another student, and it was 764 related. She had worked that case. She knew it backwards and forwards. So again, any, puzzle piece there moved may never have found out, and he probably would not be with us.
Wow. And it's an incredible story for something that to hear it kind of firsthand when we read about so many of these pieces. And I mean, everything you're saying is echoing so much of the situation in San Diego last week, where the 18-year-old had been involuntarily committed, had weapons removed from the house. The parents were even keeping track or hiding or locking any sharp objects in the house. But then there's also, that the connections across 764. I think a lot of listeners probably don't know the specifics. Alexandra, since you've been kind of so deep in researching these groups, what are the defining parts of 764, and how is that different from TCC?
Yeah, so things like TCC, so that's like an online subculture that is focused around mass shooters. There are different people that like it for different reasons. Some feel that they're in love with them, some idolize them, and some want to be them and want to carry attacks out. But what makes groups like 764 and offshoots very different is they leverage sexual exploitation by grooming people, using their nudes against them to coerce them into doing things. They use gore to desensitize them, coercive control, force them to do things that they don't want to do. And that's something that I think it's important to touch on, that I do want to talk about, is the different functions that gore has for people and the different roads that it can lead down, where it's like the San Diego shooter, they have some of the behaviors of needing to take things away, but then the function of why they were watching gore is very different compared to Dana's son, who was very suicidal and in an NVE group where the San Diego shooter was a white supremacist. But all these different things can prime people to be desensitized, to either be willing to harm someone else or harm themselves. And I see that a lot with the research that I've done and speaking to people. The most common thing that I have heard is people watching suicide videos to help amp themselves up to be able to go through with it. Another thing too is just stumbling across gore content out of curiosity. I have my own experience with a short stint of understanding what it means to be addicted to gore while I was doing research and seeing it and mindlessly scrolling stuff without even realizing the impact that it could have, and then thinking back on it. I do believe that a lot of gore content functions in a similar way, where it's hitting these dopamine receptors. It's very addictive, like porn addiction or gambling or substance use, anything else, where people are chasing the feeling that you get from doing something like that.
And it's not like a neat delineation between any of these groups. It seems like there's really a Venn diagram that you can make of gore content, of hate-based and white supremacist messages, of your kind of nihilistic violence, of kind of your anti-government, radical, like post-modern society stuff. And then that all sits in this space of suicide and self-harm, where each of these pieces are kind of feeding off each other. Does it matter exactly what the label is when you're trying to identify and then de-radicalize somebody who's in these spaces?
I would say yes, because the function of like why they're watching gore may be different. So another group that I think probably has the most research around using gore is groups like ISIS in their propaganda videos showing beheadings and things like that. They get people amped up to want to carry out violence, which is much different than someone who's going to watch 10 hanging videos because they want to die by suicide later. So the function can be different. Sometimes they're being forced into watching gore content. That's one of the ways that groups like 764, they desensitize kids, but also traumatize them. And they use it for like coercive control to make them do things that they don't want to do, use it against them, being like, well, I sent you this terrible video. Now it's on your computer. I could tell your parents, I could tell the school, all those kinds of things. So I do see it having a lot of different functions. But when Dana and I had spoken previously, she talked about her son. One of the first reasons that he sought out gore content that I think is very relevant and interesting that I hadn't thought about, but makes a lot of sense. If you want to talk about it, Dana.
Yeah. So my son was going through a pretty tough time when he started to spiral into this. So he had lost his friend group. It was right at the end of middle school, right going into his freshman year of high school. He, had a girlfriend break up with him. His dad and I are separating. Like his whole life is being upended, right going into high school. Perfect timing, right? And he just started to get a very dark view of the world. But one thing that had set him into looking at more of the violent content was the school shooter factor. Not because he wanted to be one, but because he was terrified and convinced it wasn't if, it was when it was going to happen to him. So when he was in third grade, somebody entered his school. It ended up just being a family member, right? But they entered through a door. They put the entire school on lockdown, and he was, using the bathroom at the time, had no clue what was going on. All of a sudden, a teacher runs in, grabs him, is like, you've got to sit on top of the toilet and hide because there could be an active shooter in the building. He was in third grade. And he was convinced that he didn't tell me about it until 2 months later. He was so traumatized he couldn't even talk about it. But he told me later, I thought I was going to die that day. Again, he's in third grade. The day after the Uvalde shooting, two teenagers ran through Northfield High School, right up the road from me, where he now attends school. They ran through the school with paintball guns that looked very much like assault rifles, just with masks over their face, threatening to shoot people. This is a whole, like, snipers on the roof, helicopter circling, like SWAT teams coming in. And again, he's like, okay, here we go again, right? And we also live in Colorado, where unfortunately we're no stranger to mass shootings and school shootings. So he talked about, he wanted to be prepared for what he was going to see when that happened, not if. He didn't want to be scared. It was almost like, I need to become desensitized to this. And then it quickly led into this gore content.
And I mean, that's a fine line in social media, because social media is a terrible term. It's algorithmic media.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an algorithm that has one reward center, and that's around engagement. That the longer people are engaging and the more people are engaging, then the better the algorithm is doing, and it continues to optimize that engagement function. So if somebody uses social media to research a new topic or to search for something in a new topic, it will immediately feed you everything. It's not like a Google search that you do once for your school project and then you go back to seeing, your regular content. Something you look up once. I'm researching some things for an upcoming trip, and now my entire feed is nothing but things, including a ton of scams and ads and clickbait content around that area. So if somebody, because kids have learned that social media is their place to get information about everything. Once they search that, it's all they're going to get for a while. And that's the way these systems are designed. But I think we're all finding out that they're not useful. When could you start to tell that difference in behavior? What did you see in his demeanor as he was spending like more and more time engaged?
So there's some early warning signs that, looking back, I rationalized. So he started to do the corpse paint. So that's where they do their eyes really black, their face really white. It's meant to look very scary. I think kiss makeup. Right. So I think that, looking back, was probably an initial warning sign. At the time, I chalked it up to, teenage rebellion and trying on different looks and what have you. But that type of face paint is pretty common within these nihilistic violent extremists and 764 groups. And there's a lot of kids that'll put that face paint on and then take self-harm videos. As the fall went on and right after school started, he tried really hard to create a new friend group. He's really into music. He wanted to, put together a band, and just the bullying got really bad, and he was having a hard time meeting like-minded people, and getting other teenagers to actually do something besides be on their phone. So I just saw him really turn into a different person pretty quickly. He started becoming very angry. Um, we started having a lot of fights about screen time, whereas before I never had an argument with him about screen time. His life was so full of other things. He rarely used his phone except for to call and text people. But it was a constant argument, and started arguing about restrictions, right? Like, why did I restrict this, that, and the other? And there was content he wanted to see, and my stupid parental controls wouldn't let it come up. Um, a lot of sneaking the phone too. He started sneaking it at nighttime. And I had to know phones in the bedroom, they needed to be on the family charging station. Just appearance changes too, like dressing in a more dark way. He was starting to get really into black metal, which there's a lot of self-harm idealization in black metal. And he was, wanting to wear this corpse paint to school. And we had talked about, this might be appropriate if you're doing a stage performance, but not at school. Right. So that was also a constant argument. It was like he was trying to dress very, like a Marilyn Manson kind of shocking way all the time. He started disconnecting a lot more as well. So, he'd already been disconnected from friends, was trying to get more friends and get another friend group that wasn't working out for him. So he was just like, forget about it. I'm just going to disconnect entirely. And then he started talking about some like us versus them kind of in group language that I started to pick up on might be coming from something online that was concerning. And I did bring that up to his mental health team. So just a lot of, yeah, us versus them language. Anytime I asked him about, what are you looking at online, or where did that comment come from? Right. If he would mutter something that sounded, because he would mutter things that were like violent gore content related, and I would be taken aback, like, where are you even hearing that? Right? Where's that coming from? And trying to be as calm about it and open-ended as possible. And it would just like he would just fly into a rage, just shut me down completely, fly into a rage. And just very hopeless, saying things like it didn't matter if he was here anymore. Uh, the whole world needed to collapse. Basically, the world order needed to collapse. There was some political things coming in as well. And sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second.
Well, let me pause on that for a second to ask
Oh, I have, yeah.
Alexandra, how does this pattern kind of align with the other youths who you've worked with in your de-radicalization program? Is it that same kind of progression that is that easy to kind of build in retrospect? Is it, or there some other warning signs and hints and things that parents can be looking out for when their kid is in the middle and starting to fall over that edge of becoming really addicted to that gore and nihilistic environment?
Yeah, I mean, if the kid is not in 764, the parents don't understand the gravity of the content that they're seeing. So, like other forms of radicalization, people will talk to the parents about it, but they're kind of vague about it. So the parents don't really understand, and no one is screening these kids when they are seeing mental health professionals. A long time ago, I learned not to ask if they have seen gore, to ask what age they were, what they saw the first time, are there any that stick out in their mind? I've never had a kid, even when I was in the psych hospital, not be able to give me an answer, say that they had never seen it. A lot of them, I know the first ways that they had seen gore was because people like rickrolled them, or they were like sending it in groups to like be funny, or someone showed it to them at school just like to be shocking. And they were exposed to gore at a super young age, just like how with internet and everything, kids are being exposed to pornography and like violent porn at a very young age because other kids send it just because they think it's shocking or funny, or they want to like make everybody cringe and be edgy. But then, like, what I have noticed as well, and myself included, like I have ADHD, is people who are neurodivergent, like they have less dopamine anyways. So then they seek things with like dopamine hits. And when you're looking at stuff like pornography, gore, like you are getting a rush of dopamine, adrenaline, like even if you don't like what you're seeing, you know that it's wrong, it still will make you feel something. So when you already might be in a state of being depressed or anything else, and you're looking at this and it's making you feel something, it's going to be more compelling to want to return to it. But the majority of kids that I've worked with who have experienced homicidal ideation or even suicidal ideation have all identified that they've seen a lot of gore. And I've had a lot of kids that were addicted to gore content, and like no adult ever realized that.
So Dana, you were able to put these pieces together in retrospect. You weren't realizing it at the time. There were, some visible signs, but there are lots of teenagers that are into metal. There are lots of teenagers that want to dress like the counterculture. They want to be rebellious. The majority of them don't harm themselves, never harm others. What started to then be the spiral towards some really destructive uh, behaviors in your son?
Yeah, so I think the switch from, just being into heavy metal music into the suicidal depressive black metal. I know more about black metal subgenres now than I ever cared to. But a lot of those artists have murdered people. They've self-harmed on stage, they've committed suicide, and he was talking about this in a very ideal, like idolizing them way. He had his first self-harm incident that I knew about in the summertime, and that just continued to get worse, even with, increased therapy, increased medication. I was finding self-harm marks on him almost daily at that point. And he's wanted to be a rock star since he was 2. He literally picked up the drums at 2 years old, and, has been performing ever since, right? But he started to talk about performing and self-harming while he was performing. And then it got into vague references of committing suicide on a stage. That was the most disturbing thing I'd ever heard. And again, I raised alarm bells all the way along to mental health professionals, and it was like, but he doesn't have a specific plan, which was really frustrating because I think it was very obvious this wasn't normal teenage rebellion, right? And like you said, trying to be counterculture at this point, it was scary.
And then where did it progress from there? Because, as we found out at the start, eventually the FBI uh, has searched his phone. Like, how
Mhm.
how does this continue progressing?
So when I had him hospitalized, the
And what age was this now? Because so it really
14,
started. Okay, so it started around 13 or so at the end of middle school.
he was just turning 14.
14.
So so his birthday's, yeah, at the right at the end of the school year. So I had been pretty insistent that we needed more aggressive treatment. The 2 weeks before he was hospitalized, um, because the self-harm was getting worse. Started hearing these vague references, and he was also asking about what kind of over-the-counter drugs could result in an overdose. Like, this is red flags all over the place, right? The weekends before he was hospitalized, he went on a particularly unhinged rant that was sounded pretty politically extreme, and it was, all the marginalized groups are the real oppressors. People like him were the people that were being oppressed. I started asking some questions about this, and he started to show me a TikTok video, and I immediately took his phone away because he was not allowed to have TikTok, and here he had downloaded it on his phone, again bypassing the parental passcode. um, so I took his phone away, just asked him some questions like, where are you getting this from? I'm really concerned about you. And he called me a Nazi for oppressing him. By the way, we're Jewish, so this didn't fly very well. So I took his phone away, just, hang tight. We're going to get you some help. On that Monday night was when he was hospitalized. Tuesday morning was when the detective called me, and she told me, we believe he's maybe entrapped in 764. He cannot be discharged from the hospital. We will get a court order if we need to, and keep your phone on because the FBI is going to be in touch most likely within the next few hours. So uh, they were in touch with the mental health facility to let them know they didn't want him to be discharged. There was some argument about that since he, again, didn't have a specific plan. They did want to discharge him. The FBI needed the passcode off his phone. At this point, there aren't any laws where if law enforcement is involved, tech companies have to give up the information. So we were really relying on him to give us his passcode. It took 4 or 5 days for him to do that. And then one of the agents came to the house with the detective from Denver Public Schools, or excuse me, Denver Police Department. And we spent about 2 hours going through his phone.
So that's when he's 14 at the end of freshman year.
February.
Okay. So what was that like going through the phone, and what kinds of things did you see that were not what you expected? Because you dealt with a lot to this point in terms of witnessing self-harm and hearing a lot of his rhetoric. What was that moment like?
It was pretty traumatic. So I didn't watch any of the gore content. I just saw some thumbnails and quickly, was like, okay, I don't need to see any more of that. But just seeing 4 or 5 thumbnails, I had nightmares every single night for a year. I had to do EMDR therapy, did not have them anymore. So I'm in my late 40s. I mean, what does that do to a teenager? Right. And he was watching that stuff again, 12 hours a day, both at school and on his one-to-one device at school, by the way, and his smartphone at home. So I mean, it was just horrific. I saw um he had gotten into pretty much any social media that had been blocked, YouTube, Reddit, TikTok being the main ones. He had joined Discord for a pretty short period of time, but quickly got off because some of his school bullies were actually on Discord. And that's probably one of the things that actually kept him safe. It sounds very ironic to say the bullying kept him safe because that's part of also what pushed him here, but it kept him from having more direct contact with actual people from 764 on Discord to not be on there. He was really more of a passive consumer of this content. And still, I almost lost him. Still, he's in intensive therapy, right? I mean, he's still impacted, and so is the whole family. So I think parents also need to understand nobody has to direct message your kid for them to experience harm from this. I mean, I always talk to my kids about not talking to people online that might message you. You don't know if they're adults, all these basic safety things were taught, but just the content itself can really send a child into a spiral.
Yeah, and feeding them that content is the goal of the algorithm. Like, we have an extremely misaligned social media ecosystem where, whether it's young girls that are interested in fashion being fed a nonstop stream of the most glam, skinny, fit, exciting designer brand people possible, whether it's guys that are seeing nothing except masculinity, workout videos, MMA fights, it's whatever is the worst insecurity or the worst thing for you to interact with continuously is somehow what the algorithm will find to feed you hours and hours of footage of. I think your point, Dana, that's so important here is that you don't have to seek it out, that it can just come to you. Right now, there's a very graphic, readily available video from last week that's now circulating. Alexander, like, what are you seeing kind of in real time with, first, the way that you can be passively exposed, and then what kids are engaging with and sharing within these communities right now?
Yeah, so specifically on TikTok, you can comment on things and use a sticker, which is like a GIF that's very short. And there is one of the San Diego perpetrators, because they live streamed their attack, shooting himself, and then blood is gushing from his mouth. And the caption underneath it says, "Guy spits out fruit punch." And the amount I've seen, probably maybe 40 of the same sticker on like one video. And even speaking to some of the kids, like, they weren't asking to see the live stream, and yet they did. And the live stream was mostly unsuccessful, but it did successfully show a suicide in the end. And that is like how they will be memorialized and remembered. I think it's very important to also understand that, like, similar to what Dana was saying about it being suggested content for you, and even as an adult, I think it's really important for everybody to understand, like, this is a kid problem, but this also can be an adult problem. Like, I am an academic and I have like therapeutic training, and I was doing research on suicide, reading forensic journals that are academic, peer reviewed journals that had images from crime scenes. And I was doing a lot of research. I was seeing these graphic images. And I remember thinking, reading the titles for different journals and thinking to myself, oh, that one's boring. And I had to like stop myself and be like, this is a person's life. But because I was looking at such graphic stuff, even in that moment, I was becoming desensitized. And another thing that I think is really important is that there was a young man who self-immolated on a military base a couple years ago, and he live streamed himself. And it was all over the news, like all that kind of stuff. And I was on Reddit, fairly innocuous, and it suggested that. And there was a link, and I clicked the link. It took me off of Reddit and took me to a website called Watch People Die, which I had not been on before. And it's all graphic content that's on there, and it showed the young man self-immolating, and I watched it. It was maybe a minute long. It happened so fast. I'd never seen anything like that in my entire life. And I sat there, and before I knew it, it auto-played another self-immolation video, and then another one. And maybe 10 minutes at most had passed, and I'd probably seen 15 different self-immolation videos in such a short amount of time before I even realized what I was doing. And I clicked off when I was like, oh my God, this is terrible. And for days afterwards, I felt a compulsion and a pull to want to go back and look more. And that's with an adult, fully developed brain, understanding that this is wrong. And like, I shouldn't be looking at this, knowing that this isn't good for me. And yet there I was after only 10 minutes of exposure for days after, wanting to go back and look again because I was curious. I'd never seen something like that. It made me feel fearful. And it was just like, I could not believe what I was seeing. It didn't feel real. And it made me want to look more. And so I think it's really important. Like, I'm a person in my 30s, and that was happening to me. Like, this can happen to anyone. I can't even imagine what it would feel like to be a young person when your brain isn't developed and you are being fed this content and you're seeing it and you have this pull to look at it and to be able to not look at it. Like, I don't know if as a teenager I would have been able to do that.
Well, I think we're all in the middle of that experiment every day. And I think everybody who's listening can think about a period of hours that were probably cumulatively wasted watching some repetitive content that somehow you were fed. You never tried to look up, but you're actually like really fascinated by. It's faded from my feeds now, but I used to get nonstop suggested videos of people either crashing their boats into docks or like messing up the trailers when they're trying to back in or falling off the boats. Trying, it was just nothing but recreational boaters, having embarrassing disasters at these boat docks. And once you watch like one or two, every single time I'd log onto social media, you're getting more of them. And then you're watching something on TV that you like, but the next thing you know, you're looking down at your phone, and then you're watching 3 or 4 videos in a row of a topic that you don't even care about. And you're not even really that interested in. You just see all the time now. And it's dominating your attention more than your favorite show that's actually on TV, or the person that you're sitting there with. So I think that we need to realize how we all fall into these same unwilling traps. The funniest one I have now is some guys that are identifying products in Asian grocery stores based on super zoomed in details of the box or bag. And it's incredible. I don't know how they do them, but they're like, oh yeah, those are the spicy shrimp puffs. And I'll watch like 10 minutes of these guys doing that. But I didn't mean to look at any of that. But if it's a teenager, that's exactly what could happen with the violent content, with the gore content. I think we've got to realize that it's not somebody who's a bad or evil person. It's a person who's a product of the algorithmic environment, that we have a hyper addictive device in our hands that can dominate our attention and time, even with topics we don't care about or not interested in.
I I really like that you're bringing up the algorithm, because I do a lot of advocacy work to try to get laws to fix this issue, and nobody wants to do that fast enough. And unfortunately, the tech lobby has a lot of money and a lot of pull. But I've been through this with my daughter, after I went through this with my son, not with gore content, but she got into watching YouTube shorts at school. And, so Johann Hari wrote about this in Stolen Focus years before Anxious Generation comes out. They gear these algorithms because whatever has you depressed or angry or shocked, you're going to stay. But if you watch too much of this, like, you might get turned off, right? So they kind of breadcrumb it. It's intermittent reinforcement, right? So some of the videos are the cat videos you came here to see, and then some eating disorder content or some gore content comes up. And a lot of times I think one thing is that, again, going back to parents don't realize what's on these feeds. So if I just looked at my daughter's history, I would have thought what she was looking at was pretty innocuous, right? But a lot of these videos that say funny couples dance, there was this challenge where this couple will start dancing and then the boy will pretend to snap the girl's neck or grab her by the hair and smash her face or whatever, and then they get up and start dancing again. This is saying that domestic violence is okay, but if I wouldn't have watched the video, I would have thought she's just watching funny couples dances, right? And like you said, being a victim of the algorithm, my son, again, turned into somebody he was not. He was the most sensitive, caring person, literally watched out for every kid on the playground to make sure that everybody felt included. If he saw a kid, if some kid was crying, he was like the first one to run up and try to comfort them and make them feel okay. And a lot of times these kids, it's almost weaponized against them, like that sense of loyalty and that empathy. It actually makes them sometimes more susceptible to these things.
Well, there's a reason that the tech CEOs don't let their kids have phones and send their kids to private schools that don't have screens.
Yes. Yes,
And
I watched the Instagram CEO testify at the LA social media trial, and I was a very angry person after that. I work with these parents every day, and I think there's a lot of this, it's been tech propaganda all along. Like, we have to give our kids these devices or else they're going to be left behind, right? Apparently they can't learn to read or write without them. I don't know how we all did this for years before that. I don't know, but whatever. So, but the thing that's coming out now is that it's really the parents' responsibility. The parents need to shut off the internet and take the phones away. Why did they give them the phones in the first place? They should have parental controls, right? It's like it's the equivalent of handing your kids a pack of cigarettes. These things are addictive, and this content is terrible. It's something that kids should not be watching. And trying to blame it on the parents when we were told they had to have this or else they're going to be all left behind. And it's hard for kids too. Like, my son's had a flip phone for the last 2 years since he went through this, and he's fine with it, but he gets frustrated when he's sitting around with his friends and they're all scrolling and he's like, let's go do something. Right? It's this collective action thing that we really need to get past.
I think what's so difficult about this, and you made, so many different points there, is these are the richest and most powerful companies in the entire world. And I think it's, very similar to the tobacco lobby in the 50s. It's, the biggest industries have always been doing things that are against the public interest, but they have enough money to hide the dangers until it hits a critical mass. And fortunately, there are not kids every day that are harming other people. This gets a lot of attention when it does happen, but that's a couple times a year. But when the majority are customers that are making them money and making them ad revenue, and the ease of being on social media and on your phones and accessible to your parents and doing your homework, it's still at the point where they're able to show benefits that are outweighing these harms. But these harms are very real, because once somebody is down this path, it wrecks them, it wrecks their family, it can wreck their entire school community if it turns into a school shooting. Alexandria, with the different families that you've worked on in the process of de-radicalization, how do you make that kind of cost benefit around getting somebody more offline, because you literally can't pay for groceries or a food delivery order or get an Uber or do anything like without a phone and location services.
Every family I've ever worked with in the hospital, like with de-radicalization, all that kind of stuff, I've told them to take their kid's phone away when they know it's harming them. And I've never had a single family ever do it. God bless them. Love my families that I work with, but like they're scared. They're scared of the reaction. They're scared of like the consequence of taking that away. They're worried that their kid is going to be ostracized and left out. But I mean, that's what you got to do. That is what Dana did that saved her son's life. Like literally that saved her son's life. And I don't see a way around it. If the kid is engaging with that much content, I believe it's our responsibility as adults that we have to save the kids from themselves if they're doing things that are actively hurting themselves or others. Like, in what other situation would you allow your child to continuously do something that is actively hurting them outside of letting them have a phone when you know it's bad for them? Like, if you knew they were doing something terrible at school or with their friends, you wouldn't let them go and be with their friends. But this is just one thing where it is really difficult. Like, I don't have kids myself, but it is really difficult for parents. And I empathize. I know that the kids will have a huge reaction. They're going to be really, really, really mad. But like, that's okay. Your kid's allowed to be mad at you. Like, that's okay. You might be literally saving their life. And as the adult, that's our responsibility. Just like when I worked in the psych hospital and someone would be in psychosis and they could be at risk for hurting themselves or others, you filed to get a guardianship if they were an adult because they couldn't take care of themselves. They were too sick in the moment. They needed someone else to make decisions for them because they could not make a good decision for themselves. It is the same thing. If your kid is watching gore content 12 hours a day, they cannot make a good decision for themselves in that moment, and you need to step in and make it for them.
So on making those good decisions, so Dana, your son was hospitalized, you know, the FBI and police, you saw what was on the phone. From there, what was the path to recovery? And, you know, what can other parents kind of learn from that experience to get somebody back to being, you know, functional and pro-social again?
Yeah, so it was a quicker process than I thought and longer at the same time. And I'll explain what I mean here. So I took his phone away over the weekend, and the day that he went back to school, the day he was hospitalized, right? So during the school day, he unfortunately was using his Chromebook on school property, on school Wi-Fi to look up how to hang himself, and spent the entire school day doing that. I didn't know that until the FBI went through his Chromebook as well about a week and a half later. So thank goodness I insisted that he stay. 3 days in, we did a parent meeting, and he was ranting and raving about how he needed to get back home to continue his blood rituals. So he had been watching Order of Nine Angles and 764, these blood rituals that these kids do. And he just, again, still sounded like somebody I didn't recognize. 3 days after that, there was family visitation, just meet up in the cafeteria. And we sat down, and he looked at me and he was like, Mom, what the fuck happened? I was like, what are you talking about? He was like, don't, I don't ever want a phone again. I don't know what happened. I can't even like piece it all together yet, but please don't give me another smartphone. Because I had told him he wasn't getting his phone back at that point, and he was really mad about it at first. But literally, we're talking from day 1 to day 6. He's like, I don't want that thing again. So he had started to wake up. I could see the light coming back in his eyes, right? That whole sullen, angry persona was starting to drop away already. It was recommended to keep him inpatient for minimum 30, really more like 90 days, to let him detox and deprogram. I did not have a local facility that was able or willing to keep him that long. So I brought him home. I made the house as safe as I could. I mean, we're talking, I pulled blinds off the walls. So there was going to be no blind cords. He had to sleep on my floor, no internet at all. But I tried to replace that with other things. So he was already doing CrossFit. He had wanted to drop out. He was doing drum lessons and a performance program. He had wanted to drop out. So I was like, you have to commit to this. You're going for a run in the morning. You're getting sunshine in your eyes. I bought him a used iPod at the thrift store, which you barely find at the thrift store now because now all the kids are buying them, right? But I found him a used iPod at the thrift store and I gave him all of my 90 CDs that I had left. We went to the library and got more and just had him load. He was like, I just want to have my music. So he loaded up those and he just started to get so excited about going to the library and getting CDs and loading them on this iPod. And I got him a flip phone so that way he could still be connected to the couple of friends he had left. He really didn't have a lot of friends left at this point. I figured we would have that flip phone for maybe 6 months to a year, and then I would have him back on some type of, maybe not a full blown smartphone, but something. And he still has that phone. I mean, you were talking about like calling an Uber. I have him set up for Teen Uber, and he calls a 1-800 number. He takes a lot of public transit here, and at one point I was like, I'm a little concerned about you taking the wrong bus or something, like some type of phone that would at least have some map functionality so you know where you're going. And he said, Mom, there's a customer service line on every bus stop. I just call the number if I'm not sure where I'm going. And I was like, oh, I never saw that number. He's like, yeah, because you're looking at your phone. So he just fills his life with other things. I mean, it really was a dopamine reset at first, but he honestly, after that experience, he just kind of enjoyed being bored a little bit. But I kept him, lots of books, his music, his classes, getting outside every day. He did a intensive outpatient program for a while, so where he was going to therapy every day. He missed 2.5 months of the school year. So he had a lot of support, and I think that also helped. But I mean, it was definitely a different way of life for him. I think the fact that, I raised my kids to be fairly screen free. Before that, it was somewhat easy to fall back on. Um, but it's like breaking an addiction. I mean, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were definitely some times where I gave him a little bit of access and he got into some trouble, not getting back into gore, but just being on too long or what have you. But it's been really good for him. It's been a big change in him. And I think it's given him the initiative to have some more of those pro-social behaviors. So getting back out there, trying to make friends. He put a garage band together. He talks to anybody who will listen, like, hey, can I play a gig here? Emailing different venues, right? Going up to adults and talking to them, like, hey, I've got this great band. We'd love to play your venue. Let's get that set up. He's learning a lot of leadership skills instead of looking at a screen all day.
I mean, that's really kind of a powerful reminder that of how hard it is to put down the phone. But I think all of us can think about it in little pieces of, if I was on a flight recently where the in-flight Wi-Fi and things weren't working at all, and there was a book that I needed to write a review of, and I read probably 300 pages of the book on that fairly short flight because there was no distraction. There was nothing else. And I remember getting off the flight and like reconnecting and feeling like, wow, that was like this incredible time that I never have. And it's not that I never have it, it's that I never have the discipline to have it. And I think that's something that we all need to realize, that even with our adult brains, where we've learned a lot of ways to limit and control what we want to do versus what we should do, children and teens don't have any of those boundaries. And if we have a hard time regulating ourselves, how can we expect any sort of regulation with kids and devices? So I want to ask you both in these last couple minutes here, like from this experience and these stories, like what should other parents know? And then what can other parents do if they think that their kid may be going toward a path towards the really dark gore content?
I think the best suggestion that I could give is If you find this out, you catch your kid or they come to you, I know the knee jerk reaction would be to freak out and to like be mad or shame them or be horrified with them. But if you can approach it with a little bit of curiosity to gather more information of like why they're watching it, where they're getting it, how often, the more information that you can get initially, the better like intervention you can provide them later to help support them. So if all you have is that you know they looked at a cartel beheading video and you have no context of anything else, or they say, oh yeah, my friend sent it to me, but then their search history or their like photo album in their phone says otherwise, like if you approach it in a way that's going to make them defensive, they're not going to be like honest with you about what's going on, and then they're not going to be able to receive the appropriate help. And even though it is terrible and scary, and this is not something that you'd ever want your kid to look at, of course, we have to try and gather as much information, be an investigator. That's like what I tell a lot of people is, just go into the information gathering phase so that you can make informed decisions.
And Dana, you're also doing, some advocacy work. So both at the individual family level, but what can communities and what can kind of parent groups do to try to keep this from happening to other kids?
I think we need to normalize kids going outside. We need to normalize simple things like kids getting together and hanging out. When I was a teenager, my parents never saw me unless it was like, no, really, you actually have to come home and show your face here, right? Kids don't. I live in a neighborhood where it's where all of the families in Denver want to live because it's supposed to be safe. There's lots of parks, there's bike paths that are completely off the street. There's rarely kids around. The parents are so scared of their kids getting nabbed by the white man in a van, or the man in the white van, and that guy's on Roblox. He's not necessarily around the corner. He's on Roblox. He's on TikTok. He's on, Discord. He's wherever. Kids and families have to make it so that kids have something else to do besides being on their phones, just hanging out. I think we also, as parents, it's hard because we feel like we need to pay for all these activities and fill our kids' times, but really just let your kids just go outside and hang out. It's such a protective factor. They'll feel that sense of belonging, right? Get them involved in housework, get them involved in the family, right? Give them that sense of purpose of doing something, and then they're not going to go looking for that online.
Well, I think that is a blast from the past that we need to aspire to. Well, thank you so much for both of your time. In the show notes are the links to each of our respective Substacks. You can also click on the author, and everybody's listed here. So please subscribe, please share. Unfortunately, you're probably going to watch this on your phone. To get out there, we have to be part of this ecosystem too. So thank you guys again.